Hi, everybody. I'm here early tonight. I know, just a little bit early. It's 6:20. I'm actually working right now in the Me-We Fair. If you want to join the Me-We Fair, it's a online intuitive psychic energetic awareness fair. It's pretty cool. We usually meet in Portland, Seattle, Salem, Eugene, all around and do these fairs, but now we're doing them online. We've been doing it for a year, but we're really getting going now that everybody is at home. So I am playing hooky from the fair to come and read. So I'm going to just go ahead and jump right in. Tonight we're reading chapter 3 from Return of the Bird Tribes by Ken Carey. It's amazing. I absolutely am loving reading this book. It's such powerful confirmation. You know, I've been rebuilding my greater program of teaching that's not so much focused in on trauma or focused in on these various things, and I've been calling it the star path because for me the journey has been coming into alignment with my star consciousness and remembering myself as a star, and I believe that stars are collective consciousnesses as well. So I've been seeing myself in the pieces of myself and finding myself along the way, and that's how we know it's our star tribe. That's why my Healing Pathwalkers group is called the HP Star Tribe, Healing Pathwalker Star Tribe. And so to hear in chapter 2 that discussion that really what happened is they required to create bodies so that they could just tap in instead of having to organize a body around themselves. And I can attest to that. It's really exhausting to organize matter with your consciousness. It takes a lot of focus, a lot of energy. That's why not very many of us are telekinetic. Not very many of us work on those realms because it takes an intense amount of focus, an intense amount of clarity, and you've got to have cleared out so many of the pre-programmed beliefs and limitations that are part of that egoic structure that he refers to, that formed as a result of the separation of the self from the higher self. This is why when I talk about these things, I talk in reference of this separation wound. I believe it is that core wound of our separation from our whole consciousness of self. And the way he puts it in the language he uses, it's our separation of our physical body from its guiding star consciousness. And that's why guiding star is such a term for us, right? So let's get started. Chapter 3, Civilizations. After the rebellion, there remained still a few human tribes who refused to participate in the rejection of their stellar spirits. In the sand around our council fires, we would depict each of our faithful tribes as a small circle. Around these keepers of the light circles, we would then draw one great circle to represent the Great Spirit who included us all. We knew ourselves as the Ongwihonwe, which means the people true to reality. Due to our attunement to the original instructions of the Creator, and due as well to the energy amplification that we experienced through agreement among ourselves, earthly power was still very much in our hands, but some things cannot be coerced, and love for the truth is one of them. The cooperation of the egos had to be voluntary, or the human design would not work. We call that free will. Though we had the power to do so, eliminating the warrior tribes in some great battle and thereby driving them from the earth was not something we considered. Incarnate or disincarnate, the warrior tribes remained a part of us. Incarnate or disincarnate, they would continue to disrupt the emotional atmosphere of the collective consciousness that, with them, we shared. The physical level was the level on which the warrior peoples had fallen. It was the only level on which they could be made whole. Incarnate lives were required to teach them the folly of fear motivation. Nothing but earth experience could bring them to a time when a core of them would again turn their hearts to God. Their passionate spirits remained essential ingredients in our future global species. We had to accommodate them. We gave them the lands surrounding the sea that is today called the Mediterranean. Elsewhere, we maintained our presence, but the warrior tribes were aggressive. They multiplied rapidly. Our way was to teach through patience and example, not through warfare and confrontation. So, as millennia passed, and they took over more and more of what is today Asia, Africa, and Europe, we gradually withdrew. In the end, there were only 2 islands where we were able to maintain a consistent presence into historical times. 2 islands, each an entire continent, wild, uncivilized, as refreshing to us as the abundant fresh water that flowed, living through their heartlands and raised amply upon their lush vegetation. Over these 2 continents, we sustained a clear and protective vibrational field in which many tribes lived and prospered long after the rest of the human world had plunged into darkness and disorder. You of this present generation know little of what transpired in these lands. There was no history, no written records. The people of the bird tribes came and went off the face of the Americas without a single name being carved in stone, with not one stone head being raised in arrogance to look out over the sea, with not a single human bone left to note them in the mother's soil, for they ascended. These tribes left with no remains. The Americas, continents without turbulence, few records, few ruined cities. Of all the earth's lands, we remained incarnate here the longest. After the rebellion, a certain amount of warrior energy had perpetrated throughout all the fields of thought and emotion that surrounded the earth. But in the Americas, our continental auras filtered out most turbulence of these influences. The continental auras. We're tapping into the continental auras now. On those rare occasions when excessive fear motivation did find its way into expression of among our people, we would hold a meeting of the council. If the people were a danger to the sacred balance, they were asked to change their ways. If they refused, they were asked to leave. Those who left went willingly. They would not migrate back. They knew the decision of the council was fair and just, and they knew that they had chosen behavior that was vibrationally incompatible with our continental emphasis. And so they would depart either by boat or by the great ice bridge to the north. Those who left America to settle other parts of the world knew that they were being banished. If they preserved birch bark or buffalo hide records or maintained an oral tradition, their descendants knew that a time would come when they would be invited to return, when what was broken would be made whole again, when what was lost would be found, when what was forgotten would again be remembered. Those of us who remained in America came and went peacefully, honoring our spirit selves, finding our balance with nature, living in harmony with the seasons and with each other. We were peace-loving tribes. We were not perfect, but we did not make a controversy out of every meal. We learned how to fill our needs in harmony with the earth and her creatures. We honored the land on which we lived. We saw the animals as our sisters and our brothers. The thrust of the creative interests was biological. We created fruit and vegetable foods, potatoes, corns, beans, peanuts, squashes, melons, sweet potatoes, pumpkin, yams, and many shapes, sizes, and varieties. We created new life forms to interpret sound and light in new ways. Beautiful birds, intelligent creatures with whom we communed as fellow guests in the lodge of the great Earth Mother. Our people knew the spirits of the plants and animals as equals and friends. There was still trial and error among us, fine-tuning here and there, but we had the opportunity then to fine-tune. Most of the human egos in the Americas remained true. Although the spirits of God were not fully incarnate in all, we were incarnate in many. We could keep the fear disease out of our islands as long as human populations remained small, and collective human consciousness was not making itself felt on a planetary scale. However, the disease was a part of our collective field of being, and the human populations attuned to fear grew rapidly in the millennia following the rebellion. Their vibrational influence became stronger with each passing age. By about 2,500 years ago, humans had multiplied sufficiently to signal the distinct beginning of a global human consciousness. And not surprisingly, the fearful influences were felt more often in our lands. Our continental aura was weakening. The seeds of discontent began to sprout. I was one of a small group who took on the task of monitoring the growing influences of the warrior energy in the thought fields that surrounded the earth. When I saw the seeds of fear motivation begin to twist and warp the values of key Central and South American tribes, it verified what I had sensed. I knew the Europeans would soon be coming to the American shores. I knew that we were approaching the cycle of purification, and that soon, in less than 2 millennia, it would be a single human world. Our period of continental isolation was rapidly nearing an end. So I made the choice. I would go to the heart of the warrior stronghold. I would speak to them myself. My teachings would likely be rejected. I knew that. But I would leave planted among them the images and concepts that would soften and modify their pending invasion. I would attempt to give them some conception of the overall global picture, to remind them of their own integrity, of why they were banished, and of the kingdom to come. My challenge was to be in their world, but not of it. For I knew too much, technically, to be in their world at all. I knew that it existed only in their imaginations, a creation entirely of their fears. So I did the only thing I could truly do to reach them. I took my spirit and caused it to forget, that I might incarnate among them and grow up as a child of their culture, allowing my incarnate awareness to be tailored to their fiction, molded into the communication device that would speak their language. I slumbered with them and filtered my awareness through their dreams. I put on the clothing of their culture so that when I communicated, my teachings would not be regarded as foreign, but would be accepted in the indigenous wisdom of their own Judeo-Roman society. I taught them when I awoke of the power of the living God, that it was ever available, that it was a power to which they could surrender all fear, a power that would influence them, awaken them, and make them whole. I showed them it was not an abstract, mystical, or etheric power, but a practical, biological reality living within them. It was the power called life. I taught them that the life within and around them contained profound intelligence and design. I showed them how to connect this intelligence and how to allow life's designs, the kingdom of heaven, to emerge from within their own hearts. I taught them of the spirit beings, the angels who've been wielding the creative power of life on earth for 3.5 billion years. I explained to them how blending with the Holy Spirit of these beings would transform and revolutionize their lives, but that they themselves had to invite that spirit into their affairs. For without invitation, the bird tribes would not interfere with their freedom of will. In my life, my teachings, and my example, I made the point that human beings do not have to be controlled by their fears, that they could relax and surrender all their fears to the fire that burns eternally in the sacred heart of God, that they could align themselves with their eternal love, become one with the Creator, and live their lives in peace, in harmony with each other, and with a benevolent universe. There was something I cared more about than anything in the world. I longed to see the human beings incarnate in the warrior societies, forgiving one another, loving one another, and looking at things through the eyes of their spirits instead of exclusively remaining locked into the perceptions of their egos. I'm going to read that again because I believe this is the time that's happening. I long to see the human beings incarnate in the warrior societies, forgiving one another, loving one another, and looking at things through the eyes of their spirits instead of exclusively remaining locked into the perceptions of their egos. I long for them to come to an awareness of the magnificence around them, of their potential and their forgotten joy. I call upon the highest goods, and because I was aligned with the Creator's intentions of when my statement was cut short, my prayer triggered a response from both heaven and earth. My call broke through the highest levels of the spirit world. Others saw the potential that I had perceived. The Great Spirit, a context for healing the most violent of the warrior tribes, was, in that moment, conceived. Any time a statement is cut short in the earth walk of one incarnate, and there's a longing to complete that statement, as there was in my case, it represents a bubble, a potential culture like a yogurt culture or a yeast culture. This one happened to become a new sort of human culture, complete with the manifestation of every positive as well as every negative potentiality. Christian civilization. Something that invited each one to complete the life of the crucifixion interrupted. Something that flew in the face of all odds. Something that took the fear-centered darkness of the Judeo-Roman world order and split it down the middle. There is an underside and an overside to what the unconscious cultures and centuries of Christian civilization have done. I know that well, for I and the other spirits of my light circle have monitored each of those centuries, incarnate for days or moments in the lives of key figures here and there, inspiring the bards with songs of innocence and experience. We have guided those who are open to us, musicians, children, leaders, whenever we could. Our historical, behind-the-scenes presence has been obscured from human vision because historical people have no vision. They turn their perception over to others. They refuse to give credibility to any experience not easily put into words, They believe that if their native language does not have terms for it, if people do not speak of it, it must not exist. In effect, they let others do their seeing for them. They give away their power. They become unwitting prisoners of a popular language-centered fiction. They do not often notice a single angel, much less an entire species of spiritual guardians, though we are ever present behind the stage, props of their preoccupations. People paying more attention to what other people tell them than to their own perception is the beginning of civilization. It is the beginning of a twisting, warping influence that ultimately produces a shift in human orientation, from the inner guidance of the Great Spirit to the external dominance by others. Civilization does not occur among healthy people. In healthy, non-historical societies, people are not overly concerned with other people's fantasies. They are certainly not manipulated through externally imposed descriptions of reality. In America, civilization was a step backwards. However, for the warrior tribes, civilization was a step in the right direction. The domestication of animals and the growing of grains necessitated the development of values other than the values of the predatory hunt or annual raid on the neighboring village. So to the warrior races we taught certain arts. The civilizations were initiated in Japan, India, China, and elsewhere, provided us with educational context in which we could introduce values that warrior societies would never develop outside of such contexts. Since their tightly woven linguistical preconceptions made it virtually impossible for us to communicate directly with the individual members of the warrior societies, we did the next best thing. We communicated slowly but surely through guiding the long-term development of their collective values. We'd been working with this slow but relatively certain form of angelic human communication for a long millennia before we sensed the time to introduce the more specific teachings that could only come from one of us who'd actually incarnated among them. The idea is to introduce at the beginning of the Christian era through initially rejected, nevertheless lingered on in Western consciousness. Like ivy working gently but firmly on stone walls, they have gradually taken hold and upset many of the traditional assumptions of the warrior state. By intensifying every creative as well as every destructive human influence, these ideas were directly responsible for the highly stressed social context that gave birth to the Industrial Revolution. Although it has wreaked havoc on the earth, ecologically, the Industrial Revolution has been both valuable and necessary. When humankind is healed and we are able to work freely through our species again, there's no ecological damage that will not, even before a few centuries, be entirely undone. It's easier to flush toxins from the Earth's river valleys than to remove the toxic ideas that cause them from the human minds. In order of healing, it is the human consciousness that first must change. The most significant effect of the industrial era is that it has birthed the information age and has brought us into communication with your race on a scale far beyond what otherwise would have emerged. The Industrial Revolution drew the inherent contradictions of the fearful state into high visibility at a time when the intelligence level among human beings has risen to unprecedented heights, almost to the very threshold of awakening. Global telecommunication systems now keep human attention focused upon the problems that result from the fear-centered ways of thinking. It will keep your attention focused on these problems until you solve them through the only act that can, a total departure from the entire warrior paradigm. This departure from the old ways of history has already begun. Many are now aware of us. Our consciousness flows daily through the word processors of 1,000 creative thinkers. Our insights and perspectives are bubbling beneath the surface of dozens of new movies, hundreds of new books, and thousands of new articles and popular songs each year. Humankind is linked in a single socioeconomic community that now closely monitors all new and potentially relevant information. Your present global civilization is rooted upon premises of separation from God. As flawed as any civilization that came before, but it has dynamically accelerated our education of your race. It has increased human intelligence across the board. Hundreds of thousands of you are now about to understand something that 200 years ago we could only get through in bits and fragments to a few isolated individuals. This book was written 30 years ago. I would say now it's more like billions of you are getting this message, are hearing this information. I know that for me, my journey of this awakening into this awareness and this consciousness has been, yes, all of my life, but my alignment into and allowance of my full star consciousness to come in and teach me and guide me has been about the last 8 years, almost 9 now. It's transformed me. I beckon you. Go within. I got to go back to the fair. See you guys tomorrow.